I have no sources inside of Russia. Everybody who was my friend or ally is either dead, in prison, or in exile. There's not a single reasonable person who's sitting inside of Russia right now. Anybody who's there has become part of the regime or is in dire straits.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've got Sir Bill Browder on the show, and just a reminder that you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report.
Great to be here.
It's been a big week for diplomacy, and it's great to kind of get your reaction as we wrap up the week that was the UN General Assembly held in New York City. Donald Trump, he surprised us by saying that Ukraine is winning the war, that Ukraine can take back its entirety, including Crimea. He said that Russia is struggling economically, that Russia is a paper tiger. He supports the United States continuing to supply weapons to NATO. So just your reaction to that.
Well, I mean, everything he said is true, that Russia is struggling economically, that Ukraine could win the war, and so on and so forth. The only thing that's odd about the whole thing is, of course, that Trump has basically changed his view by 180 degrees. If you remember, he was the same. This is the same U.S. president who told Zelensky that he has no cards. That he told Zelensky that he had started the war, and so on and so forth. And so it's highly inconsistent, which brings one to question the sincerity. I mean, he's flip-flopped quite a few times. If you remember, at the very beginning of his presidency, second presidency, he issued a Truth Social tweet on the very first day after he's inaugurated, saying that if Putin doesn't cooperate and cease fire and end the war, then there's going to be tariffs, taxes, and sanctions on Russia. And of course, here we are now, I guess 10 months later, and there's no tariffs, taxes, and sanctions on Russia. So he's flip-flopped a lot of different times. I wouldn't hold my breath that all of a sudden the U.S. has changed positions. He's all over the place on this thing, but it is helpful. It's helpful for him to say that. It's very much a the truth, and hopefully it does give Putin some pause to think about what he's got to do next.
I mean, we had been so confused watching on about this change of tune, this shifting gears, and then the Wall Street Journal's reporting that the shifting gears is that US officials have basically been advising him on what's actually happening on the front line. So Keith Kellogg, Mike Waltz have been briefing him on the current battlefield situation, the conditions, and Ukrainian army's military plans that would require US intelligence. So they're in the know of what they plan to do. So basically, Trump is listening to the team who is saying that Putin is lying, that Ukraine is winning. But Bill, regardless of that being a good thing, does it mean that Trump is only wanting to be on the right side of this war because he wants to back the winning horse?
Who knows what Trump wants or doesn't want? He's all over the place. There's no there's no clarity on what he wants and why he's doing whatever he's doing. It is clear, and I should make it clear to everyone watching this, that the United States has stopped supplying military aid to Ukraine. Under the previous administration, the United States was supplying military aid to Ukraine. Under the Trump administration, they're not. And so the United States was responsible for 40% of the military aid, and that now has to be either cut down in terms of what the Ukrainians need, or the Europeans have to fill in the gap. The U.S. also supplies intelligence, and we don't know what intelligence is being supplied or what isn't being supplied, because that's not a public number. Hopefully, it is supplied and it continues to be supplied. Now, what Trump's ultimate objectives are very unclear. He has also done something which I think is quite harmful to the whole situation, which is that he said that the United States wouldn't get involved if there was an attack on a NATO country. And that's effectively, I mean, putting it really in stark terms, even if the United States is a member of NATO, if the United States is not involved, if the Poles shoot down a Russian jet, a Russian fighter jet, then that means that for all intents and purposes, Article 5 of NATO no longer works. And so, I wouldn't be popping the champagne and saying that all of a sudden Trump is back on side. It doesn't look like it at all because his words are pretty cheap. His actions are much more meaningful, and his actions are quite detrimental to the common good.
And it is important to wait for actions over what he says, but he did mention that he thinks that Ukraine can win back its land in full capacity by which Russian forces occupy. It's around 18%, and that includes Crimea, Bill. But not long ago, Donald Trump basically told Zelensky that he would have to agree to a land swap. He'd have to agree to conceding certain land, whether it was Donetsk or wherever, the Donbass, to get a peace deal over the line. Is that now off the cards?
Well, the most important thing to know is that there was never any peace deal that could be done for the simple reason that Vladimir Putin had no intention of doing a peace deal. It wasn't as if there was some pre-agreed deal where if Ukraine gave up certain pieces of land, then Putin would stop fighting and killing Ukrainians. That was never on the table. It was never offered. It was never anything because Putin needs this war on any terms in order to stay in power. So it's not like there was a deal agreed. Now it's off the cards. There was never a deal agreed. Putin wants this war. He needs this war. This is a war for his political and physical survival. And he will carry on fighting this war. And so I guess by Trump saying that, it's only an admission that there's not going to be any peace deal. And so why not let the Ukrainians do whatever they intend to do?
One of the things that Ukraine wants is a signed agreement that the United States would give guaranteed security protection to Ukraine once the war finishes, so that the United States would basically help out in the event that Putin would invade again, which there's a high possibility that he probably would do that if the war ends. Now, right now, the war seems so far from over. You and I have spoken at great lengths about, Bill, but Trump can promise this. He can say to Zelensky all he wants that, yes, I'm willing to give you security protection. He can even sign an agreement, but this would still need congressional approval to do so for it to be legally binding. Do you think that Congress is united enough in actually signing this over that they would provide security protection?
Well, I think we actually have to flip the whole thing on its head. Trump has not agreed to any security guarantees. He's said that in very vague terms that they might do something, and there's been never any explicit security guarantees. And this is, of course, what the Ukrainians want and also what the Europeans want, because the Europeans don't feel confident fighting Putin alone if they provide those security guarantees. So Trump has not provided those security guarantees, and nor has he intimated that he would. The Congress is an interesting story because in Congress, you actually have many Republicans in Congress, along with the Democrats, who are very supportive of Ukraine and very much against Vladimir Putin. And so I don't think that such a congressional vote would go the wrong way. I think it would actually go strikingly the right way. But what it requires is that the U.S. actually wants to provide security guarantees. And even if the security guarantees were provided, Trump has been flip-flopping so much on this issue and many other issues that I'm not sure that many people would be comfortable relying on those guarantees. And so if you look, for example, at the Saudis, there was always sort of a nuclear umbrella from the United States over Saudi Arabia. And after Qatar got hit by Israeli missiles, the Saudis went immediately out to the Pakistanis who have nuclear weapons and signed a nuclear mutual defense treaty to get the access to Pakistani nuclear weapons. That shows that whatever guarantees were provided by the United States before are no longer all that reliable to our partners.
And we've seen that with, of course, with what happened with the 1994 signed agreement. But Bill, if the United States is saying they're not willing to get involved if Russia were to attack a sovereign NATO country, and what we've seen was happening in Russia, in airspace, in Poland, it would seem that obviously the United States wouldn't get involved in security agreements with Ukraine if they're not willing to uphold their part of Article 5.
Well, it's a pretty worrying thing. Now, of course, Trump says that on one day, and then he may change his mind another day. What we do know is that everybody who's underneath Trump wants to do the right thing, that wants to honor the agreements, that wants to be part of NATO. And so I guess, what everybody is hoping for is that to somehow live through this next 3 years without a major incident, so that the United States can sort of, whoever the next president is, will honor all the international agreements and all the guarantees that the United States has made, because the world is in a kind of state of chaos right now as the U.S. has withdrawn from the global world order.
Bill, I've asked this to a number of my guests this week, but I really want to get your thoughts on it. Tuesday's speech from Donald Trump at the UN. Do you think he vindicated the United States in that moment when he backed Ukraine after February, the UN Assembly before last, when the US voted alongside Russia when they did not condemn the invasion of Ukraine?
Well, all of his words are cheap. Well, I don't think it means anything. Of course, the votes in the UN are more meaningful, and let's see how the United States votes on the next Ukraine resolution that comes up. But these speeches, this is sort of like a comedian talking. This is not a statesman. And what he says at the UN, he spent most of the time talking about a construction project that he didn't get granted when he was trying to rebuild the UN building. And so, whatever he says in these speeches, it goes from one place to another. And so it's all about what actually happens that has to be analyzed. And the more we focus on that and less on the words, I think the better everyone's going to be.
Russia backed Donald Trump's calls for a comprehensive global ban on biological weapons. Dmitry Peskov, he said that was a very important call from Donald Trump when he said that at the UN. He said that naturally the Russian side is ready to participate in such a process, biological weapons, and of course it would be good to somehow formalize it again at an international level. Now, Bill, Russia calling for a global ban on biological weapons while also literally using chemical weapons that they say they got rid of on Ukrainian troops. I mean, how ironic is this?
Well, I mean, this is classic Putin. He basically, does terrible things, and then talks about all sorts of great concepts. They in Russia they talk about having a rule of law. It's a mafia state. In Russia they talk about honoring agreements, and they invade a sovereign neighbor. And so I think that in fact, whatever Russia says, whatever Putin says, you should just look to see, because he's probably doing the opposite.
Another ironic thing that happened this week was Sergei Lavrov. He responded to NATO and Trump saying that Russian drones or jets that are flying in NATO airspace should be shot down immediately. Lavrov said that another clear example is the crisis in Ukraine provoked by the West, through which NATO and the EU have already declared a real war on my country and are directly involved in it. But Bill, this was clearly an example of Russia testing and teasing NATO.
Well, I mean, we're already in a hybrid war, as the Danish prime minister said today. Russia's not just testing and teasing. Russia is doing stuff. There's drones that are sort of Russian drones that are circling around Danish Air Force bases. There's explosive Russian drones, 16 of them that went into Poland. There are 3 Russian fighter jets that went into Estonia. This is no longer testing and teasing. This is actually doing, and it raises the question: at what point does NATO, does the West fight back? I think that the problem for the Poles or the Estonians or for other NATO members where we're all working together is that if they shoot down a Russian fighter jet, will the Americans be there under Article 5 to support the alliance? And Putin is testing that, and I think that what he's hoping is that everybody is so scared to fire that shot that he can just continue to push and push and push and make more and more trouble and show weakness on the west side until some moment. And the only thing that Putin responds to is hard, raw force. And the Turks saw this, by the way, back in the mid 2000s. A Russian fighter jet went into Turkey. And it was supposed to be going into Syria, went into Turkey. And what did the Turks do? They shot it down. And was there a war between Russia and Turkey? No. But that's what you do with these Russian fighter jets when they violate your airspace.
You show strength. Bill, how likely do you think that it is that after this switching gears from Donald Trump, this backing of Ukraine, talk is cheap, as you said, but how likely is it that we will see Vladimir Putin call up Donald Trump and basically charm him and say, look, I'm ready to negotiate. Let's get back to the table, and do exactly what he's done before. Rinse and repeat to stall time.
Well, I mean, this is Putin's classic way of doing stuff, and there's no reason to think that he wouldn't go for another round. Another round, gains him a month, 2 months, 5 months, who knows? Putin doesn't want sanctions. Trump has sort of intimated that there's a possibility of sanctions, although we've not seen them. He keeps on teasing that as a possibility. And so Putin will do everything he can to just keep this whole game going. And we don't understand really at the end of the day why Trump is so favorably disposed towards Putin. It's not as if even now he's saying nasty things about Putin. He's saying, oh, he's my friend. We get along well. I'm disappointed that our friendship didn't lead to a ceasefire. But he's not saying, this man is a killer who is launching a unprovoked war of terrorism and aggression against a peaceful sovereign neighbor, which is the truth. And that's what every other world leader has said. He hasn't done that. And because he hasn't done that, then there's no real consequences.
Well, on that note, Bill, on Monday, on the eve before he's set to condemn Vladimir Putin's war for the first time, pretty much on the UN stage, he told a reporter asked him whether he still trusts Putin, and his response was, "I'll let you know in about a month from now." Okay, I mean, what's happening in a month? Because we keep kicking the can down the street.
Well, I mean, there have been 7 ultimatums from Trump to Putin to stop the war, to cease fire, to come to the table. And all 7 ultimatums have passed through without any consequence. So I don't think anything's going to happen in a month that wouldn't have happened already.
And if you think you can still trust him, we've got some bigger problems here. But Bill, Ukraine has been very successful in targeting Russia's oil refineries, as you and I have spoken about. In just 1 week, Ukraine targeted 2 major Gazprom oil and petrochemical facilities, causing disruptions to the plants. At one point, Ukraine was forcing Russia to slash 20% of their refinery capacity. So, I mean, Bill, you know Gazprom very well. Anyone who's read Notice knows that you had invested in them when your time in Russia. It's Russia's state-owned energy corporation. How effective is it for the Ukrainian army to be targeting Gazprom facilities?
Extremely effective. Gazprom is the golden goose of Russia. You hit Gazprom, you hit Russia. And of course, there's a lot of facilities, so just hitting 2 facilities is not going to stop the economy of Russia. But if Ukraine carries on, and I hope they do carry on, and in a certain way, Trump's hands-off approach to Ukraine, not supplying military aid, has allowed them to do so. But when Biden was supplying military aid to Ukraine, he said, don't strike inside of Russia. And so, ironically, by Trump not providing military aid, he can't demand that they don't strike inside of Russia. And that's what Ukraine has done, and Ukraine is hitting the lifeblood of the Russian economy by continuing every day to hit oil refineries, to hit Gazprom, and to continue to do that is causing real problems in Russia. For example, in Crimea, they no longer have any gasoline; they're out of gas, and in other parts of Russia. And the more that the Russians see that this war actually affects their day-to-day life, the more that it's likely that people are going to start grumbling, why are we in this war? And it makes it much harder for Putin to carry on the war if the entire country is against him. But we need to really create consequences for the average Russian in order for that feeling to come about.
Bill, do you still have any sources inside Russia working in energy at Gazprom or wherever that have spoken about the disruption that these strikes have caused?
I have no sources inside of Russia. Everybody who was my friend or ally is either dead, in prison, or in exile. There's not a single reasonable person who's sitting inside of Russia right now. Anybody who's there has become part of the regime or is in dire straits.
There's concern that by Ukraine targeting Russian oil to cripple the economy, that it could backfire for Donald Trump and spike oil and gas prices domestically in the United States. Now, this would obviously politically hurt Donald Trump. The economy it's his thing, basically, and it's the way he was elected. It was the way he will continue. We don't know what will happen with tariffs and so forth, but this will hurt him if this happens. So is there a way for this, for Donald Trump to avoid this but stay on the side of Ukraine?
Well, I mean, this has always been the problem for every world leader. Is at the moment, Russia can continue to fight the war because they have a huge hundreds of billions of dollars of oil revenue, and so the problem has been, well, if you cut off the oil that Russia supplies to the world, you reduce supply and demand is the same, then the price goes up. And so, since the war started, this has always been this conundrum. What do you do so you don't spike inflation, but at the same time you deprive Russia of the dollars they need to fight the war? And so this weird compromise was decided, where there was an oil price cap that said that if Russia can't sell oil above the price cap. I think it was $60 before. I mean, maybe they're trying to lower it a little bit. And as a result of this price cap, everyone thought that their revenues would be reduced. And what did Russia do? They went and bought hundreds of 35-year-old, almost mothballed tankers, put them back into service. It's called the shadow fleet. And these tankers continue to sell oil at whatever price Russia wants to sell its oil, not worrying about the price cap. At the end of the day, I think that Donald Trump came up with a pretty good suggestion, which is imposing penalties, sanctions on buyers of Russian oil, and that idea is a good one. The problem is that he hasn't implemented it. He did it on India for reasons that make sense, but he then didn't do it on China and Turkey, who are the other two buyers of Russian oil. Now, the main problem with this idea of imposing sanctions or tariffs on a whole country is that you don't have to do that, and it's a very blunt instrument. If Trump really wanted to do what he was intending to do, and I support this part of his policy completely, he should impose sanctions on the 9 or so refineries in China, India, and Turkey who buy the Russian oil, and say that if you do business with Russia and buy Russian oil, then you can't use a U.S. bank, you can't do business with anybody, and anyone who does business with you will also be in trouble. And guess what? The minute after they do that, there will be no more purchases of Russian oil by these refineries. They're not going to give up their entire world in order to continue to do business with Russia.
Yeah, I mean, you've said that before to be a bit more specific by targeting corporations that are buying Russian oil as opposed to the country. And we're still waiting to see what happens with China. Doesn't seem as if Donald Trump has any plans to impose these sanctions, but he will meet with Xi Jinping next month. Just finally, Bill, on these sanctions, Trump in his speech, he said that he was prepared to enforce a very strong round of powerful tariffs against Russia. You mentioned this before, it's all talk. But he did say that, he's holding back because he's saying, well, why should the US impose these sanctions when you've still got Slovakia, Hungary and Turkey? Now, Turkey's not part of the EU, but why are they still importing Russian oil and then I have to go ahead and impose these tariffs and sanctions? He said that basically by allowing these countries to keep importing Russian oil, it's wasting a lot of time. So is there any chance we will see these countries back away from importing Russian oil, or is this just kind of another excuse from Donald Trump to not have to apply these sanctions?
It's just another excuse. I mean, Slovakia and Hungary are defying the European Union. Germany supplied 60% of their industry was connected to Russian gas. They stopped it completely at enormous cost to their economy. And for Trump to be focusing on these tiny little countries that are de minimis, that are defying the European Union, and then saying for that reason he's not going to do anything, just is obviously an excuse. It's clearly disingenuous to say that he's not going to do sanctions because of what Hungary is doing.
So, Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.